We left off talking about the beginning of chapter 10, that being on photosynthesis, and this idea that it is possible to take sunlight, solar radiation, solar energy, and convert that into a chemical energy. And in our that process is called photosynthesis, and it takes place in both plants as well as photosynthetic algae. We think that it actually started out photosynthetic bacteria. We think it started off in photosynthetic bacteria. Do they have chloroplasts? No, they don't. They don't. So what they do instead is they have pigments that are embedded in the membrane of their cell membrane. So that's how they do it. They don't have an organelle called a chloroplast. We are going to talk, however, about chloroplasts, and we're going to spend the next couple of slides talking about that, and a little bit of plant anatomy. Back in the day, we actually did a lot of plant anatomy. Kind of glad that we got away from that. The majority of photosynthesis is going to take place in our leaves. And our leaves are, inside of our leaves are these organelles called chloroplasts. Lots and lots of chloroplasts that are mainly found in the mesophyll. And the mesophyll is just the middle layer of the cell, of the leaf. On the outside of the leaves, on the top of the leaf and on the bottom of the leaf, there are tiny little holes that you really can't see unless you have a microscope that are called stomata. They call them pores. They're holes. They're openings that can either be open or be closed. And that is where gas can enter and exit. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse into the plant. We talked about this at some point earlier, because that carbon dioxide is going to serve as one of the building blocks for sugar. Yeah, so we can make our glucose. So that carbon dioxide has to come in through that opening. And oxygen has to leave. So oxygen during photosynthesis is going to leave the cell and exit through these pores. Here we have our leaf, and we can look at this in more detail. And the inside, the middle, is that mesophyll, and that's where our chloroplasts are located. And then we also have a top and we have a bottom of the leaf. And that's where our little stoma are located, on the top and the bottom of the leaf. You can enlarge that even more, and then you can look at the chloroplast itself. And the chloroplast has two membranes. And we're going to talk about kind of the structure of that next, and we'll come back to this after we've talked about it. Chloroplast has an envelope of two membranes, and it is surrounded by a dense fluid called stroma, which is kind of a chunky liquid. A lot of enzymes that are in that stroma, dissolved in that stroma. Oh, the Slayton is cackling again. The very inside layer of the chloroplast is these things called thylakoids, which I think should use green. Let me do that again. Thylakoids. Kind of look like stacks of pancakes. But they are actually connected to each other. So even though they appear like just these flattened sacs on top of one another, they're actually interconnected. If you, one of these is a thylakoid. If you look at the whole stack, we call that a grana. And why is it green? Chlorophyll. So there's this pigment that gives the leaf its green color. And that is embedded in the membrane of the thylakoid. And that's why plants are green. Now, I know it's coming, right? Gesundheit. No one's going to ask the question about leaves and green. No? Okay, we'll wait then. Somebody will ask you. What? What? Wait, what? Oh, there we go. Thank you, Grace. Why are some leaves different colors? Especially in the fall. Okay. So what happens is there are not just chlorophyll pigments. There are other pigments that are different colors. And those other colors are always there, but we don't see them because the bulk of the pigments are green. They're chlorophyll. And so they kind of overwhelm what our eye sees. But there are other ones there. The first pigment to break down in the fall is chlorophyll. So once that pigment is gone, the oranges and the reds and the yellows, those all start to become apparent. They were always there, but you can only see them after that green fades away. And then eventually those molecules also fade away, and then you just end up with a brown dead leaf that falls off the tree. Owen. Because in the winter time, the trees, deciduous trees, those are the ones that drop their leaves, go dormant. And part of that going dormant is to drop your leaves. And so the chlorophyll stops being maintained and all that breaks down. The proteins break. The chlorophyll is just a pigment. It's a protein. And that breaks down, and then the leaves fall off, and the tree goes dormant for the wintertime. So it kind of it's using much less energy in the wintertime than it would other times of the year. Evergreens continue to photosynthesize year round. Yeah, they're a little differently adapted to more harsh winter conditions. Yeah.
How do evergreen leaves photosynthesize?
They are. They're still photosynthesizing. They just the needles are just very thin, and that is to prevent desiccation, which is a fancy word for drying out, because pine trees tend to be in arid environments where moisture loss is a huge deal. And so they, rather than having a lot of surface area, because having a lot of surface area will increase loss of water, they have these thin needles, and that decreases water loss, but they can still do photosynthesis through the leaves.
They also have stomata.
Mm-hmm, they do. Yeah. Cactus is a little different. Cactus actually have it on their trunk. They have chlorophyll on their trunk, and they perform photosynthesis through their trunk. Because they don't really have leaves. Okay. So photosynthesis is a really complex series of reactions that we're only going to kind of graze the surface of. And it can be summarized as we're taking in carbon dioxide, and we'll just keep using green. Carbon dioxide and water and our sunlight will make our sun green. What the heck? And out C6H12O6. What's that? Glucose. We're also getting out some oxygen, and we're getting out some water as well. The overall chemical change that occurs during photosynthesis is the reverse of what you see in cell respiration. Okay, so this piece is cell respiration here. And this other piece obviously is our photosynthesis piece with the light energy there. But overall, I mean, it's not step by step. It doesn't work step by step backwards or in the reverse order, but in overall terms, the two are the reverse of each other. A big part of photosynthesis is splitting of a water molecule. and it's going to split that water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. And as it splits it, it's going to release an electron, or I should say electrons, from the hydrogen ion, or from the hydrogen to produce a hydrogen ion. And those electrons, again, we talked about electrons before. We talked about how electrons have energy, how they're rotating very quickly, or they're circulating very quickly around the atom of the nucleus. And so they have energy. And so we're going to liberate that energy from the atom that it's in. And that happens as a result of the sunlight. The sunlight's going to do the job of actually splitting that water for us. So here's where things go in terms of carbons, where they come in. They're coming in, the carbon dioxide comes in, and the carbon dioxide will be specifically responsible for producing the sugar. So those oxygens and those carbons are going to go into becoming glucose. And the water will also be used to help us form that glucose. But notice here, this is an interesting thing. The oxygen that we breathe, okay, this stuff is getting released from the stomata. Okay, the stomata is going to release that oxygen. It actually doesn't come from carbon dioxide. It comes from water. So when water gets split by sunlight, it releases an oxygen molecule. So the water gets split, oxygen gets released, and that's the oxygen we breathe in. It came from a water molecule. Okay, which I think is kind of cool. Just like our oxygen that we breathe in becomes water that we sweat out. Right? Same idea. Okay, photosynthesis reverses the direction of electrons flow compared to respiration. It is a redox. It's a series of redox reactions in which water is going to become oxidized. We're going to liberate those electrons from the water molecule, and we're going to transfer them to our carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide is going to become reduced. Photosynthesis is an endergonic process. Requires lots and lots of energy. Its job is to take all those high energy electrons and to store them in glucose. Glucose is food, right? Food is energy. We eat glucose. The plants use glucose. They, quote, eat it, or they use it as well. So we need to store those electrons in some form, because remember when we were talking about cell respiration, we can't just make ATP and keep ATP around. That doesn't work. ATP is a very unstable molecule, and it tends to explode or decay very rapidly. And so you've got to transfer it into something else. So our storage is going to be these glucose molecules. We're going to put those electrons into those glucose molecules and store it that way. Okay, so the carbon dioxide becomes reduced and the water becomes oxidized. Photosynthesis is a pretty complex process. And we're going to break it down into its two fundamental stages. And this is just a preview of what's going to happen. And we'll go through this in more detail afterwards. There is two parts to it. There is the light reactions, which involves the light, sunlight. And there's the Calvin cycle part. And the Calvin cycle part is going to involve the making of sugar. So first we bring the sunlight in. So now we've got energy, and now we've got to store that energy. And we store that energy as the sugar. Okay? Light reaction brings the energy in. Calvin cycle stores that energy. The light reactions are going to happen in, or the light reaction is going to happen in the thylakoid, in that thylakoid membrane that we were talking about. And the big players in this are going to be our water. Our water is going to get split. That's going to release oxygen. But when we do that, we release an electron. So in cell respiration, what was our taxi that we used? NAD became NADH, right? And FAD became FADH2. So we had two carriers. We also have a carrier in photosynthesis. It's not the same one. We have another shuttle, another taxi, but this one is NADP, which is kind of nice because it sounds like it sounds like photosynthesis, right? So if you see something on an exam and they're talking about NADPH, you know that they're talking about photosynthesis. That P doesn't stand for photosynthesis, by the way. It stands for phosphate. Light reaction also generates ATP. And we don't call it oxidative phosphorylation anymore because what's driving the production of the phosphorylation? The light is. So we call it photophosphorylation. We're using light energy to make ATP. That's the light reaction. That's our first step. Our second step is going to be in the Calvin cycle. Calvin cycle happens in the stroma of the chloroplast. All these things that I just made in my light reaction. Oh, I should have said that one. This one and this one. And along with carbon dioxide that comes in from the air, I use to form sugar. So light reaction is very important because without the light reaction, you cannot get the Calvin cycle to happen. You have to have the light. You have to have that ATP formed. You have to have that NADPH formed. And you need the carbon dioxide. Then you can make sugar. Calvin cycle begins with what's called carbon fixation. That's a fancy way of saying turning a gas form of carbon into a solid form of carbon. We're fixing it into something that's tangible, that's touchable, that's usable. Carbon dioxide is not usable as a gas. It has to be turned into something solid, and that's carbon fixation. This is a great diagram that really summarizes everything that's going on in photosynthesis. We're going to start with our light reactions. Light's going to come in. This is taking place. This whole thing here is our chloroplast. This green guy here, that's our thylakoids. That's where the light's going to get captured. Water's going to go in here. And out of this whole process Oxygen comes out, goes away. ATP comes out. And NADPH comes out as well. That's the first part. And then second part is going to be Calvin cycle. Those things I just made in the light cycle, ATP, NADPH, those are going to be used along with coming in from the air or carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide goes in the Calvin cycle along with the ATP and the NADPH. And we make a simple, we haven't actually made a glucose molecule, but we make a simple sugar. Which is just 1 unit long. How many units does it have to be glucose? There's 1 carbon there. 6, right? I have to have 6 of them because each simple sugar just has 1 carbon. So I have to have 6 of those. Right? The electrons, what happened to the electrons between here and here? They got moved to my sugar. So all my electrons are stored there in that simple sugar. And my NADPH became oxidized, gave up its electrons, gave up its proton, gave up its electron. It goes back to the light reaction and do it all again. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay, how overwhelmed are you? Very. That's what I figured.
This is more simple than some of this.
That was the overview. Yes. So, we are done for the day. I don't want to torture you anymore.